on General Government. My name is Representative Camille Vela-Wilkinson, and I'm the chairman of this subcommittee. Would the clerk kindly call the roll, please?
Chairwoman Vela-Wilkinson.
Here.
Representative Maury.
Here.
Representative Baginski.
Present.
Representative Mazurkowski.
Here.
Representative Nadone. Representative Ruggiero. We have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to begin our presentations this afternoon with the Office of General Treasurer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go through a brief presentation of the General Treasurer's budget and then the Secretary of State's budget, and then you can call up the main event. The Governor recommends $44.2 million for FY 2022 for the Office of the General Treasurer. This is about $300,000 less than enacted for FY 2021. You can see that nearly 90% of the office's budget is funded from restricted receipts, and this is mostly the retirement system and unclaimed property. The Governor recommends the enacted authorized 89 full-time equivalent positions, and his budget would fund 86.3 of those. Turning to the Crime Victim Compensation Program, as you know, the Criminal Injuries Compensation Act does provide for innocent victims of violent crimes to be reimbursed for certain expenses that are shown on this slide. These benefits are partially paid from fines that are levied against people committing felonies and misdemeanors, and the amounts of the fines have been unchanged since the mid-1990s. The program is funded from the court fees, which are the restricted receipts, plus 60% federal matching funds. And historically, general revenues were used to deal with a backlog of claims. No general revenues have been provided for the program since 2005, but beginning with 2019, general revenue support for regular claims did resume. This slide just shows historical funding by source for the program. There have been several legislative changes over the past decade that have increased either the claims or the amounts or the limits, and the most recent was enacted by the 2016 Assembly. At the same time, receipts began declining in about FY 2013, and as restricted receipts decreased, so do the federal funds. You can see from this table that there was a large increase in claims beginning in FY 2017. The office did implement some changes the next year about how relocation claims are handled, which you can see has brought down the average claim. As I mentioned, the request for additional general revenues did begin with the FY 2019 revised budget request. And for FY 2022, the office did request $900,000 from general revenues to make up for the fact that there are fewer restricted receipts. State law does require that 15% up to 150% of court fees go to support the Crime Victim Compensation Program. So the courts are able to retain 15% up to 150% to support their own justice assistance program. The court's current contract with justice assistance is over the $150,000 limit, and so the governor's budget recommends that the courts only retain the 15% of court fees. What this would do would provide an additional $80,000 more in restricted receipts for the treasurer's program, and the governor does add $80,000 to the court's budget to backfill those lost restricted receipts, and justice assistance would remain whole. So, as I said, the governor does recommend $300,000 more than requested from restricted receipts. $100,000 of that is from the courts only retaining 15%, and it appears that the other $200,000 is to offset the reduction to the requested general revenues. There are no projections, though, that this funding is available. Turning now to unclaimed property. As you know, holders of unclaimed property do file it with the treasurer, who then attempts to find the owners. Any amounts remaining after expenses and returns to owners are transferred to state general revenues. The May Revenue Estimating Conference just met, and they adopted a transfer of $15.6 million for FY21 and $14.2 million for FY22. This is different than what was in the governor's budget, and that is shown in this chart. The Treasurer's Office also oversees the state retirement system, and that program is funded from 0.175% of average total investments. The governor recommends $13.6 million for FY 2022. This provides about $500,000 more for the computer system, $200,000 more for personnel, and $100,000 for all other operations. The governor recommends $4 million for the remaining 42 positions. This is a current service budget. It does have some revisions to cost allocations, and it does include turnover savings consistent with the enacted budget. The office is also responsible for administration of the state's tuition savings program. Fees paid by out-of-state participants support administration and the state's scholarship programs. These fees generate about $5.5 million a year. And as I said, the majority of that money does support two scholarship programs run by the Office of Post-Secondary Commissioner, the Dual Enrollment Program and the Last Dollar Scholarship Program. The Treasurer's Office also receives fees for operations. And on March 3rd, the Treasurer did announce a new program which would provide $2,500 in a college-bound saver account to any child of a frontline worker who passed from COVID-19. The 2016 Assembly did create a new Office of Debt Management within the office's budget, responsible for monitoring, managing the process by which governmental units issue and manage public debt. There is a recommendation for $400,000 from general revenues, and I'll just remind you that the second debt affordability study was issued in July 2019. That included recommendations for debt capacity of state, municipal, and quasi-public entities. And that concludes the General Treasurer. If you don't have any questions, I will move on to the Secretary of State.
Are there any questions from the committee?
Okay, Secretary of State, the governor recommends $11.9 million for FY 2022. This is $3.2 million less than enacted. You can see that the majority of the Secretary's budget does fund salaries and benefits, $6.9 million in FY 2022. So starting with staffing, the governor does recommend 59 full-time equivalent positions. This would fund 58.6, and as of April 10th, the Secretary had 58 filled positions. As you know, the Board of Elections and the Secretary of State are responsible with elections in Rhode Island. They're charged with different responsibilities, and most of those are mandated by law. And the next two slides just show the different responsibilities that both the board and the Secretary of State have. Those are for your review. Moving on to election expenses. There were 3 elections during 2021. Those were predominantly mail ballot elections in September, November, and March. The CARES Act did provide federal funding, $1.8 million, which was used to run the September and November elections. The March special election cost about $1 million. That was funded from general revenues. The governor's recommendation for FY 2022 returns the budget to a non-election year level. So it removes the federal funding and it aligns general revenues similar to what a non-election year would look like. The governor's budget also includes $1.8 million from Help America Vote Act federal funds. This funding can be used to update the central voter registration system, to purchase e-poll books, mail ballot equipment, and risk-limiting audits. Each year, we report to you on the various IT projects that the office is overseeing, such as redesigning the open meeting interface and restructuring the business services database. The office spends about $500,000 a year from general revenues on these IT projects, which we call eGov initiatives. You'll recall last year you authorized a new 10-year lease for state archives beginning August 2020. That move has happened, and there is $300,000 in FY 2022 for state archives. Consistent with the enacted budget is $40,000 for the tour program and $25,000 for the visitor center. And the governor also recommends the enacted level of $125,000 to support the Rhode Island Historical Society and $18,000 to support the Newport Historical Society. And those grants are identified in Article 1. And then to conclude with capital projects, the governor's 5-year plan does include $200,000 from RICAP for FY 2023, and this is for various election equipment, including privacy booths, AutoMark tablets, and this is consistent with the capital plan that you approved last year. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from members of the committee? Let's please put the mic on for Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and greetings to everyone in the committee. Over the past several years, my office has made significant investments in technology and cybersecurity. And these investments have been vital to making our mission of making government more accessible and transparent for Rhode Islanders. And I'm proud to say that my office has seamlessly conducted and continued to provide services to the public, even during this crazy pandemic. In many cases, we've even enhanced those services. And I want to thank the General Assembly, the members of this committee, and your colleagues, because these upgrades and this kind of service would not have been possible without your partnership. This past year, we successfully implemented a new and more secure central voter registration system, all the while managing 4 statewide elections, which were predominantly conducted by mail ballots. And furthermore, the department has efficiently implemented remote online notarization, which was a critical service for Rhode Islanders and local businesses that we hope can continue permanently after the pandemic. We've relocated the state archives to a facility that properly preserves our historic documents, and we've digitized all of the Rhode Island's corporate records to create a more robust online database. The department also secured nearly $1 million in grant funding to assist the functions of our office. As for the fiscal year 2022, the department has several strategic initiatives planned that will continue to meet the evolving needs of Rhode Islanders. We're continuing to upgrade our business corporations database to enhance and encourage online filings, while continuing the work of digitizing our historic archival records. Just so you have a sense of this, just last year, 72% of annual reports in our business services division were filed online, and 83% of new filings were filed online. So clearly it's where people are going, and we need to be prepared with the kinds of systems that can support that kind of use. With these investments, our election team is also continuing to enhance the central voter registration system and streamlining the mail ballot application process for local communities. However, these investments also assist with redesigning our open government and transparency portals and tools, which helps Rhode Islanders hold their government accountable. We did see reduced funding in the governor's proposed budget that simply will not allow us to continue to meet ever-evolving needs of Rhode Islanders, particularly during this pandemic. A reduction of the kind that's being proposed in the governor's budget is not going to allow us to continue to be prepared for the constantly evolving cyber threats to data and information that my office is charged with protecting. And simply put, reduced funding would be a major setback. Under my tenure, the Department of State has a proven track record of delivering results with the enacted budget. This requested amount that we've put forward from my office will allow us to continue this core function of providing information and services to every Rhode Islander, and to deliver the kind of government that Rhode Islanders have come to expect. The past investments have allowed us to modernize the office. With that said, in addition to my additional request, we've had one more item come up that requires us to have a slight revision to the initial request, and it's that the department's going to be requesting additional funding to support the Rhode Island 250th Commission. This has come up since we've submitted our paperwork, and the purpose of the Rhode Island 250th Commission is to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country. What's great about the Rhode Islands Commission is that it's going to give us the opportunity to highlight the critical early role that Rhode Island had in the American Revolution and colonial America. We'll be able to finally set the record straight because the entire country is looking to celebrate the 250th, and we're basically first at bat with the burning of the Gaspee. So we want to be ready to take advantage of the historic tourism and economy just as things are hopefully opening up so that we can promote the rightful place that Rhode Island has had in the making of our country. This commission really does have the potential to help boost tourism in our state and pay for itself at a time where our hospitality and tourism industry absolutely needs it. So my staff is going to be following up with the committee directly to offer more specific details on this request, but I did want to highlight it and bring it up in the public hearing. I'm very proud of the work that's being done at the Department of State, and we look forward to continuing to invest in our infrastructure and technology so that we can improve services and in turn improve the livelihood of all Rhode Islanders. I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. So when did your office move into 33 Broad Street for the archives?
That was last summer, and I want to say that it was around June. Colleen Halloran-Valandry, my budget officer, will know the exact date since she monitored the proceedings with quite detail. Colleen, can you?
Yes, it was in July, actually.
Actually, July.
Yep.
And you found that you have sufficient parking around the building? I know Broad Street has a tendency to be a little bit tight.
Yeah, the building actually does have its own parking. It's, to put it in Rhode Island terms, where the Johnson & Wales bookstore used to be, and has adjacent parking. So it has on-the-street parking, metered parking, but it also has its own private parking with some spaces available for visitors. And by the way, in addition to being on a bus line.
Excellent. And it's fully accessible?
Yes, it is fully accessible.
Okay, great. And how's everything with the new location for the Board of Elections?
You'd have to ask the board. I think it looks pretty fabulous, and I think that it's worked to their needs, but I defer to you, to the Board of Elections to answer that question on their own behalf.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the Secretary of State? Madam Secretary, thank you for your attendance this afternoon. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Okay. Did the General Treasurer want to address us?
Hello, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I certainly can, General. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Chair Vela-Wilkinson and members of the committee. I'll give you a brief overview of what has happened in the Office of the General Treasurer over the past year. And I want to start by thanking each of you for your leadership and your fiscal stewardship of the state of Rhode Island and your partnership during these challenging times. Our office endeavors to serve the people of Rhode Island by strengthening financial security and promoting economic growth for the state of Rhode Island. It has been an eventful year, but I am pleased to report that all of our office's programs are operating well and have come in at or under budget for the year. When COVID-19 first came to Rhode Island just over a year ago, our office quickly acted to ensure that the state had the adequate financial resources necessary to scale up the emergency response and continue to provide vital services to Rhode Island. We worked with all of you, the General Assembly leadership and Governor Raimondo, to convene the State Disaster Emergency Funding Board for the first time in history to guarantee that the state would have adequate cash flow to meet its financial obligations. We secured $300 million of emergency financing so that the state could keep paying its bills, could scale up the emergency response, support frontline workers in those early weeks and months of COVID before the federal stimulus money came. We also used our relationships with local banks and credit unions to encourage them to provide federal PPP loans to all eligible small businesses, regardless of whether those businesses had prior relationships with those banks or not. Our largest program, as you know, is the Employees Retirement System of Rhode Island, also known as the State Pension Fund. Every Rhode Islander deserves security in retirement and dignity in retirement, and especially those Rhode Islanders who spend their lives serving the community as teachers, first responders, nurses, state and local officials. I'm pleased to report that the retirement system is stronger today than it has been in a very long time. During 2020, we paid out $968 million in benefits to retirees, and the unfunded liability of the retirement system declined by over $100 million, and the funded status of the plan rose for the third year in a row, despite the market turmoil caused by COVID-19. This year, all retirees in the pension system will get a cost of living adjustment as a result of the pension system's strong performance. Retirees can expect to see an increase, a permanent increase in their benefit amount, beginning the month after they retired. In my first term as treasurer, I implemented a back-to-basics investment strategy for the pension fund that is paying off. Last year, the fiscal 2020 year, we outperformed 87% of other large pension funds across the country, and we ended 2020 at an all-time high of nearly $9.5 billion. On top of the strong financial performance of the retirement system, for which we were once again awarded the Government Finance Officers Association Award for Excellence in Financial Reporting, we've also undertaken a series of actions to enhance the customer service of the pension. Expanding one-on-one retirement counseling so that members of the retirement system toward the end of their career can get personalized one-on-one retirement coaching. And we're in the process of upgrading our website to make it more easy to navigate, including an online pension benefit estimator that will be available to all members. Aside from the retirement system, our office is also entrusted with managing College Bound, which is Rhode Island's 529 plan, 529 College Savings Plan, a tax-advantaged savings plan to encourage Rhode Island families to affordably save for college or other on-the-job or other post-secondary education. I'm pleased to report that once again, last year, College Bound remained one of the highest rated 529 programs anywhere in the country, with a 5 out of 5 rating for savingforcollege.com. As of December of 2020, we had over $4 billion of assets across nearly 200,000 accounts nationally. And last year, we expanded the program to cover the cost of apprenticeships to help Rhode Islanders get the job skills that they need in on-the-job settings. So College Bound continues to perform well also. Unclaimed property is, I always say every year, one of my favorite parts of my job. Our duty as in our office as administrators of the Unclaimed Property Program is to reunite Rhode Islanders with their missing money. Basically a statewide lost and found for money is how we explain it. Every year we recover cash and other assets from old bank accounts, from safe deposit boxes, from companies that owe refunds or rebates to customers but haven't been able to find them. And it is our job to reunite Rhode Islanders with that missing money. Since I took office in 2015, we have returned more than $70 million to nearly 100,000 Rhode Islanders. And this program is more important than ever this year because far too many Rhode Island families and small businesses are still struggling to make ends meet. We've launched a campaign during the pandemic to remind Rhode Islanders that it's not only individuals, but also small businesses and nonprofits that can have unclaimed property. And we, in the month following that campaign, successfully reunited over 1,000 small businesses and nonprofits with that missing money. Finally, I'd like to talk about the Crime Victims Compensation Program, because this is the one area where there are some complexities in our office budget that need to be addressed. Just by way of reminder for committee members, when someone is the victim of a violent crime, an assault, vehicular manslaughter incident, a homicide in the worst case scenario, when we think about being the victim of a violent act, we often think about the physical or emotional impacts that come from being a victim, but there can also be real financial hardship that comes from being the victim of a violent act. Maybe as a victim of a violent act, you have to miss work and you lose those wages. Maybe you have to pay for medical bills that aren't covered by insurance, or you have to clean up the crime scene if the crime scene was your home. And in the worst case, of course, families have to pay burial expenses. The Crime Victims Compensation Program can provide up to $25,000 in relief for victims of violent crime and their family members. With your support a few years ago, we enhanced the program to cover relocation costs, which is especially important for victims of domestic violence. There are a lot of people who are victims of domestic violence and are in abusive relationships that they can't leave, or they feel they can't leave for financial reasons. And so what we can do, due to your support, is we can now cover hotel room stays if it's an emergency situation, and we can also cover the first 2 months of rent and a security deposit on a new apartment. Since we started doing relocations a few years ago, we've helped more than 300 Rhode Islanders relocate, get out of dangerous situations into safety, and I am sure that we have saved lives in the process. Now, as Liza mentioned, and she always does a terrific job, we do have a funding issue with the Crime Victims Compensation Program this year that is rather serious that we're going to need to address. The first thing I want to stress is that spending out of the program has not gone up. In fact, the last few years, 2018, 2019, 2020, spending out of the program has been flat to down slightly. So it's not a spending problem. The problem is a revenue problem. As Liza mentioned, a majority of the funding for this program comes from court fines and fees charged to offenders. And then there is a federal match that we get that is a match to a portion of that court revenue. Now, court revenue has been declining for several years, and therefore the federal match has been declining as well. And this past year, with the shutdowns from COVID-19, court revenue went down substantially. And so we are now facing a deficit in this program, both in the current fiscal year 2021, and we project a deficit in 2022 as well. So our request is a general revenue allocation to help shore up the Crime Victims Compensation Fund so that we can continue to offer this life-saving support to victims of violent crimes in Rhode Island. We anticipate that we require $470,000 for the current fiscal year, and then an additional $225,000 above the governor's recommendation next fiscal year. And I'll just remind everyone once again, if we do not put up the state money for this program, we lose out on federal matching dollars as well. And so if we do not do this, then we just dig ourselves deeper and deeper into the hole. I thank you, and we've had some good conversations offline about the needs of this program. I'll just stress once again, it's not an overspending problem. Spending has been flat. It's a revenue problem from the courts collecting less in fines and fees, and therefore us getting less federal matching dollars. We need to correct this problem because these are Rhode Islanders who are in very difficult situations, who need help, and I am committed, and I know we all are committed to helping Rhode Islanders through those difficult times. And so I do ask for your assistance and your consideration in stabilizing the Crime Victims Compensation Program. With that, I thank you once again for your leadership and your fiscal stewardship during this past year and always. It's an honor to partner with each and every one of you in service to the state in promoting financial stability and economic growth for all Rhode Islanders. And I look forward to continuing that partnership going forward. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Treasurer. Are there any questions from the committee members? Representative Nadeau?
Yes, General Treasurer Magazine. Could you tell me, like, what is the match? Is it $1 for dollar with the federal money with the court fees?
Yeah, thank you, Representative. It's a 60% match. So for every dollar the state spends, the federal government contributes an additional 60 cents.
All right, so it's 60 cents on the dollar. And what percentage would you say the revenue is short over this year, and you projected to 2022 as well? You had said there'd be a shortfall.
Yeah,
Can
so
you give me a percentile?
Yeah, so it's pretty significant. And again, the revenue had been declining even before COVID because the court was collecting less in those charges even before COVID-19. But this year it's quite serious. I mean, for this year we're looking at a deficit of, as I said, roughly $470,000. The total spending out of the program is on claims is just over $1 million. So it's close to a 50% drop.
Okay, thank you.
Would the clerk kindly identify that Representative Barros has logged online and is participating? Are there any other questions?
Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee?
Yes, may I be marked in the present as well?
Yes, absolutely. And if you would please annotate that Rep. Nardone is here. Thank you. General, I have a couple of follow-on questions with regards to the Crime Victims Fund. So have we identified if there was an increase in domestic violence during the pandemic when we were in quarantine? And do we know what that number is?
Yeah, what we found during the quarantine was that initially claims of all kinds went down, and now they're starting to pick back up again. The number of claims for domestic violence cases specifically, I would have to circle back and get you that information after this meeting. But I can say the general trend for domestic violence and for all types of claims was, a decrease in claim volume early in the pandemic and back up over the last few months.
All right. And with regards to a reduction in the collection through the courts, is it because of the diversion process, or is there a problem with collection, if you know?
It's a little hard to say. I mean, I've heard some speculation that the Justice Reinvestment Program that passed a few years ago, which I certainly supported, did reclassify some crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, and that may have had an impact on the amount of fine revenue that the court was collecting. But to be honest, we don't have a whole lot of transparency into what the cause is for the decline of revenue in the courts over the last few years. But then clearly this year, the courts shutting down for several months had a dramatic impact, in addition to the more modest annual decline that we were already seeing.
And the last question that I have is, the funding has been sufficient for our needs to this point. Could you tell me where you came up with the dollar amount for the increases for this fiscal year and for the coming fiscal year?
Yeah, so over the last few years, even as revenues were declining, we were okay because the program for a while had a surplus. We had a cash surplus in the program. That surplus has now been spent down. So, this is a problem that we've known about for a few years, the declining court revenue, and, we've raised the alarm on it and had conversations with fiscal staff about it for a few years now. For a few years, we were able to get through because we did carry a surplus. That surplus has since been spent down, and now, of course, things have accelerated with COVID-19. We are happy to provide the math that we put into our projection for what the deficit of the program is, both this year and next year. I would say we're fairly confident in our projection for this year's deficit because we're close to the end of the fiscal year now. We're only 6 weeks away, so we have a pretty good idea of where we're tracking this year. Next year, obviously, there's a little less precision in the projection, but we're happy to provide you and the staff with the math that we use to calculate the size of the deficit.
Yes, I would definitely appreciate that. Thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Any questions from committee members at home? No. Thank you very much, General. Clerk?
Thank you, Madam Chair and representatives.
Do we have someone on the phones tonight? No?
That calls for tonight.
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. That we have concluded our hearing for this afternoon, and we'll be coming back at the rise. Thank you very much. Our subcommittee is adjourned.